start sharing my screen and get started. First of all, I'm excited to be presenting to you all. It's an honor to be here with a bunch of smart people and a bunch of FileMaker developers and other developers. And I'm going to be presenting on taking things from FileMaker and putting them on the web, mostly using the Data API. And I'm going to talk through why I do this. I'm going to talk through my approach. I'm going to talk about some web technologies, some FileMaker integration technologies that most of us are familiar with. And here's a brief intro about me. And Vince, I'm not doing it because you're on this meeting, but I've had this on my slide deck for a while. I do back into parking spaces as well, just like Vince, and that's actually Vince Manano. So I'm going to walk you through a FileMaker solution and carving out a piece of it and taking it to the web via the Data API. So this is what we're going to go through, and I'll go ahead and say it, and you're going to know it by watching the presentation. There's no web direct here. I personally have been kind of a web developer most of my adult life, along with being a FileMaker developer. So I have actually never done a web direct project. That may be surprising to some of you, and I know web direct is a huge part of some solutions. I've never used it. I've always kind of gone the route of native web technologies, and so that's just my blurb about web direct. So we are going to look at something that's pure FileMaker. Then we are going to look at a PHP application talking to the Data API. Then we're going to look at a view application talking to the Data API. Then we're going to look at a view application doing something different. You'll wait. So we're going to review FileMaker, a FileMaker flow for managing a shipment. I'll give you a brief intro into that. What I'm going to be demoing is actually a real company and a real project that we spent quite a long time on about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And they move, it's a fine art logistics company. So they move artwork all over the world. And we are going to be looking at one shipment and all the things that encompasses. And we're going to take a little piece of that shipment and present that information to their clients and some of their end users. Yeah, we're going to look at a web application. We'll definitely be looking at some code. And number 5 there is something that I personally have, it's kind of for those of you who do any web development, it's kind of a pain to do things when we have that familiar namespace that FileMaker has with these double colons. And sometimes that means a static class, and a lot of technologies don't like something that has double colons in it. So you have to parse it. So there are all these different ways to get around it using JavaScript, using Twig, which is a PHP templating language. You just have to do a lot of weird things to get around that. So I have a way of dealing with that. So why? Why do I take things straight to a browser? It's because it's common, and I think some of you may have seen recently that Adobe is pretty far along coming out with Photoshop in a browser. It's been a long time coming, and I think Todd Geis actually posted an article about that in the Slack group. So that's just, everything's going to a browser, and that's one of the reasons that we're here. Security, I think it also promotes simplicity. So for those of us who aren't web developers but FileMaker developers, when you start with something new, usually you start simple, and I think it's a very nice way to introduce yourself to new technologies. And why not web direct? So for me personally, there's a lot more control, and I know there are lots of tricks that you have to do with web direct on occasion, and I know my introduction to web direct was 1.0, and I know it's a lot better now. I'm just not familiar with it. So they're web-centric technology stacks, and I'm always a fan of learning something new. So this fits me, even whether I'm presenting on it or not. I do want to talk about security for a minute, because this presentation and doing this web technologies with the Data API it really gave me a whole new appreciation for FileMaker's security model. The ability to have such granular security on tables and fields is huge for this. So in this particular solution, you see in the FileMaker column, we've got this solution has 96 tables. 14 of the tables are exposed to the web. There are API tables that we use. There's one that's exposed to the web. Then of all the layouts we have 7 layouts that are exposed to the web. So the rest privilege set only has access to the things in the web column. And then scripts is another thing. I know that some people that use the data API, they rely heavily on running a script to do everything, to push JSON into FileMaker to get JSON back out. When the data API first came out, I looked at it more like a dumb data store, like I would any other database. And so I never used scripts in the first year or two that the data API came out. However, you'll see that there are 3 scripts that are running in the REST FM REST privilege set, and that is just to log in, to set a password, and to check for an authorization pin, because this solution actually has 2-factor authentication that I sort of hand rolled, and it's baked into FileMaker. So running scripts is great. I just haven't had a ton of experience because I always just went straight to doing queries, but the scripts are pretty powerful. If I had to do this again, I'd probably leverage scripts more, and I wouldn't have to deal with FileMaker's flavor of JSON. So field level access is the big kicker. Of all those fields we have in the entire FileMaker solution, less than 100 are read-only, and there are only 3 that are allowed to edit and create, and that's just to add activities to this web application. So I urge anyone that is not familiar with the data API or any other integration technologies with FileMaker to make sure that you really think about your privilege sets, and you want to, the privilege of least permission, PLOL. There's some acronym for that, but that's definitely the approach you want to take when you're exposing anything from FileMaker to the web. Again, promoting simplicity. This is just a quote that I like, and I try to pay attention to this whenever I'm developing. And I think I'm going to, before we get to the demo, I just want to do a brief glance at some of the web technologies that we use and some that are available. Now, I gave this presentation at Pause on Air a few weeks back, and when I got to this slide, I said, so, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the CSS frameworks on the screen, and the JavaScript front-end frameworks and back-end frameworks, and someone raised their hand and said, I've never heard of any of those. So I want to be careful not to assume that everyone knows everything on this screen, but basically on the far left, the CSS frameworks, those are just a handful of popular presentation layer CSS frameworks that a lot of people use these days. And for those of you who do web development, you're going to be familiar with those. The 4th one down, Bulma, that happens to be the one I'm using for the web application that you're going to see on the PHP side. Then in the 2nd column there, those are kind of the big popular JavaScript front-end frameworks. And I know in the FileMaker community, most of us are at least familiar with what those are. And of course, React, I think has a pretty good and bigger and bigger reputation within the FileMaker community. I personally happen to gravitate toward Vue. I've played with all of them, and I grokked Vue, and I was able to advance pretty rapidly with Vue. And so Vue is sort of my tool of choice. And then there are a whole slew of JavaScript backend frameworks. But the point is that everything we're looking at is web-based. And as we go through the presentation, we're going to get to more and more JavaScript and Node. So with that, Oh yeah, one more slide. So this is just a quick glance at doing the exact same thing in JavaScript, in FileMaker, and in PHP. And those are just little code snippets to make a call to AWS S3 to upload to create a bucket, or to upload a file. So you can do all those things in these vastly different technologies, but which I think is a really cool thing. You can see that they look different, but they do the same thing. And one of the reasons I enjoy web development and FileMaker development is because one often informs me or educates me about another. Sometimes it's about what not to do, and sometimes it's about finding a faster way to do something. So I think that's hopefully that's a helpful illustration of doing the same thing in 3 different languages. So now I'm going to get into my demo. So we are going to go ahead and close this, and we're going to open. Let's see, where is? Bring this back to the screen. Hopefully everyone can still see my screen. All right, so I'm going to open a FileMaker solution. So this is that application we talked about that manages shipments. There's a lot going on here, and I'll just say a couple quick things about this solution. It uses the party model, which I would not recommend doing something that for a small project, but this was a large project with a lot of different entities, and the party model really fit nicely. It also uses transactions, and we have a separate file. This is sort of a model view controller type thing. You can see here, this is our UI file, and then there's an API file that sits there, and it's very similar to the concept of a controller, and it's something that those of you who are familiar with Carbon framework from Todd Geist, that's what that is. And then we've got a data file. And actually the API file is very much like Carbon transactions. Again, it's something that if you were churning out a quick project to do something in FileMaker over a weekend, I don't know if I would go to the trouble to do that, but on a larger project, it really, really comes in handy for troubleshooting, for fixing bugs. It's just a great approach, and it's also real solid, and that's something that we can all learn from Vince when he talks about that next week. So I'm just gonna quickly dive into a shipment. So I've got a shipment here, and the screen, there's a lot going on, but you can imagine the people that use the system live in it every day. So the data is very dense, but I try to be as organized as possible. So I'm just going to quickly walk you through what we're looking at. So we've got a shipment. We've got a date of the shipment. We know we've got flight information. At this high level, we just have some basic information about this flight. This system also integrates with an enterprise tool called CargoWise for customs documentation, tracking, invoicing, all that kind of stuff. We've got these tabs down here. So in the general tab, every shipment is going to have a shipper, an agent, and a consignee. So these are these players. These 3 boxes are pretty important for the shipment itself. We've got an area for notes. We've got activities, and activities is going to come into play in a little while. But an activity you're going to see a bunch of test data in here. But an activity is something that's going to take place on the day of the shipment, like the truck got to the museum. Someone from field operations picked up the courier that's going to be traveling with the art. It went through customs, it cleared customs, it got palletized, it got loaded onto the aircraft. All those things are activities that they track so that people can be notified when they happened. That's the whole goal. We're going to take a little bit of information out of this mess of a shipment, and we're going to expose it to some end users. Over on the far right, these are all the people that are associated with the shipment, whether or not it's a coordinator, a courier, field ops. Some of these people are internal employees, and some of these people are external. It might be a curator at the Met. It might be an agent that's going to receive the courier and the artwork in Paris. So all these people are going to be listed over here. And you'll notice access. So we can turn on and off individual access to a shipment. This is another feature that will add security that we're going to look at in a little bit. So even though someone can log into the system, they actually can't see a shipment unless they have access to that shipment. So quickly, I'm going to go through these tabs. This is the so since this is an air shipment, we've got flight information. Then we have field ops. There are a couple different people that are going to be working on this flight. They all have individual schedules that apply to them. We've got crates. These are the crates that contain artwork and things like the dimensions are really important. Next is trucking. So these are the trucks that are going to be hired out to go and actually do the transportation. So that's a whole nother ball of wax into this mix. Then we have a separate tab called contents. These are the things that are actually inside the crate. You can imagine this is a pretty simple shipment. We've got 3 crates with 3 pieces of painting, three pieces of art in them. Our courier tab has some couriers. Now for testing, I've got a few in here, but really there's probably going to be at least 1 courier depending on what's being shipped. In this case, I just have 3 for testing. These couriers can also be associated with crates. Then we've got some documents. We're going to look at that in a minute. You'll notice that this one document here, we've got 2 documents that say share. So this is something that actually integrates with Amazon Web Services S3. Got 2 documents that are shared here, but you see we have other documents that are not. And those are the only tabs that we're going to look at here. So I am actually, since I'm in the system, I'm going to click this button to take us out to the web application so that we can look at this exact shipment. So here is our web application. Let me log in. So hopefully by now you are noticing that even though this looks vastly different than the FileMaker layout, we've got all the information that's pertinent to this shipment for someone that is outside of the company. We've got our players up at the top. Since it's an export and it's leaving, the shipper is the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is green. And then we've got our agent information and our consignee information. Then over here, we can see that we've got crates, contents. This is the schedule. We've got our flight information that shows up. We've got some masterpiece contacts. We've got activities. We've got our couriers listed. And we also have, notice we have 2 files here. And remember, we're only sharing 2 files. So for security purposes, when someone wants to share a file that they dragged into a container in a record in FileMaker, that share button will go ahead and push that to S3, to an S3 bucket that is the shipment. And so that's how we're able to, so right now these actually go and this is referencing S3 and seeing what's in the bucket for the shipment. And that's why these files are showing up here. The first version of this, we were pulling straight from the data API. And that was, there was some security concerns that the IT department had. And, you know, I won't get into, you know, debating that, although it'd be an interesting discussion. So we just said, you know what, we're just going to push them to S3, and then that way they're outside of your FileMaker system, which is what they wanted. So I'm going to click around and drill into some of this. So for trucking, I can go to a trucking, and I'm going to see all the information related to this particular. That just takes me to the schedule, and so you can see that I've got the courier. Here's field ops, trucking. These are all the things that are going to happen on this shipment that anyone that has access can see. I'm going to go back here, and one of the benefits of taking this straight to a browser is you get stuff like this. So this looks great on a phone. or a tablet. All this stuff happens out of the box. It's one of the great things about modern CSS frameworks is they're all responsive, or any decent one is going to be responsive. You get lots of bells and whistles for free. And some of us are old enough to remember that that you used to have to do all this by hand, and now these CSS frameworks give you a lot of this out of the box. So notice when I'm technically pretending I'm on a phone. When I'm on a phone, this has got a lot more scrolling going on, and so we show these little anchors to jump down to certain parts of the certain areas or cards of this. I can go jump down to files and scroll back up, and as soon as I stretch this out far enough, those go away. So everything wraps and stacks pretty nicely. I'm gonna also jump into crates. So these are the crates, and remember we had this information is this information, and we can show the crates in metric or imperial, and we've got some other information that can show what courier is related to what crate. I'm going to go to contents. Same thing. This contents, it's really easy on the eyes. It's simple to see. People see everything they need, nothing they don't. And this screen is just a lot busier. And if I click on some of these details, you see there's much more information that is not necessary to share with any of the browser users. I'm going to go back to the shipment, and let's see, access, links, content, just back to our wise. Yep. The last thing I want to show is, or the next thing I want to show is down here for activities. This is the only piece of the solution where people can actually add or edit records. So these tasks happen to be completed, these activities. But if I go into an activity, one doesn't have any images, but I believe this one does. Yeah. So I just dragged a couple of images to this before. I've got 2 images in here. So I'm on this activity called cut and stack. So I'm going to jump back to the FileMaker solution, and we're going to look at that activity. And right now I can go, and what I did was I just listed all the images for this particular activity. So that's something that we wouldn't get into in this discussion, but S3 can be a great way to not only upload and share objects, images, PDF files, but you can put them into these great buckets. So we have a shipment bucket, but we also have activity buckets. So these files are only going to show up for this particular activity. And I just refreshed this, which got rid of everything. So I can do this to download the images, and then of course I can export the fields. They don't often go here to look at the images, so we don't download them. But the first thing we do when we grab this list is we just get the objects. We don't actually get the files. We just get the objects. So it's super small. We just loop through and create a couple of records in this portal. So I'm gonna close that card. I'm gonna go back here, and I'm gonna quickly. So I'm gonna drag. And this works great on a phone as well. And most people that are using this, that are doing this, are going to be on a phone. But I can just simply come over and drag an image. You see we've got this really elegant, nice drag and drop. And I just want to point out that this is using an open source JavaScript library called FilePond. And just for a moment, I'll just show you what this looks like. But for those of you interested in JavaScript library that does an awful lot of powerful image manipulation and uploading and downloading of files, it's pretty solid. So I'm going to jump back to here. So now we have this file. I can delete the file. I can view it. I can click on these files and show these images. And I'm also going to jump back into FileMaker. And I'm going to go back to this particular one, and I'm going to list the S3 bucket again. And so now we can see that there's our there's our new image, that CPS dashboard file. So it's a great way to safely, so none of this is, we're not taking any storage on the FileMaker server, and certainly not inside a container. All this stuff is stored in S3. So let's, so I'm gonna go back here, and what I want to do now is show you kind of behind the scenes how we're getting all this data. So I'm going to open a tool called Insomnia. It's very similar to Postman, for those of you who aren't familiar with Insomnia. And I've got, I'm just looking at my web application, and I'm just grabbing a shipment. And in this particular case, I'm passing the ID of the shipment, the user ID, to make sure that I have the right access. And then these roles will also tell me what access level this person has. So I'm just gonna hit this, send it, and of course, okay, good, it worked. So this is looking at, this is just raw FileMaker data coming from the data API. So we've got our field data, we've got our portal data, we've got something like 800 lines in here. There's a lot of information that we get back. So this is one shipment record, then several, probably 20 to 30 other related records. We've got activity roles, we've got flights, we've got couriers, we've got trucks, and all this information comes to us because all this information is on a layout. Because of course, with the data API, we're tied to context. So there is a API REST detail layout that has all this information on that layout. And so of course, FileMaker very kindly gives us all this information back. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that we've got portal data, and inside that portal data, we've got all these portal rows. And then when we get to, say, this courier array, so we've got 3 couriers, and we see this is I mentioned this earlier. We've got the relationship name, and then double colon, and then the field name. So these are things that are not. We would rather avoid having to deal with those if we could. And so there's a way to do that. Right now, I made this API call to the shipment. I'm pressing these IDs, and this is the information I'm getting back. So you'll notice under portal data, there's lots of portal records here. And when I collapse all that, we also get portal data info, which is really useful sometimes, but we certainly don't need it for the purposes of this. So this is a lot of data we don't want back. So I'm showing you this here for because we're about to get a lot less data. So let's jump over to Sublime, because that's my brain works. I have everything in silos. So for Sublime is where I've done PHP development for a very long time, and when I'm doing JavaScript development, I'm in VS Code, which is pretty popular with probably a lot of you. So this is my shipment controller, and this is just a RESTful API. And if I go to, I'm going to go down to get a shipment, which is right here. So when I call this get shipment function, all I'm doing really is I'm going to my model, and I'm getting a shipment, and I'm passing some data. So let's go look at the shipment model. So here we go. So I'm not going to walk through every line of what's going on here. Just know that this information builds JSON so that we can make a query to FileMaker's data API. And it's worth pointing out that there are several libraries out there in different languages. There are certainly a few for PHP that work great to talk to the data API. When the data API first came out, none of them existed, so I rolled my own. Then when people started to release them, I evaluated them for what was going to work well for me. And I'll go ahead and tell you there's one called FMPDA by written by a guy some of you may know named Mark Denise, I think is how his last name is pronounced. And it so I'm bringing in his library, and after that, when I do my get shipment, um, this is I'm passing the database I want, the host, my credentials, and then I'm finding records, and I'm passing it the layout, that the context I want, and I'm passing it the uh, data object, which is something that's built up all in here. So this is the result of me finding this particular record, and when I get this record back, FileMaker gives us everything in an array, and since I know it's only one record, I'm only returning the first value of that array. So what we saw in Insomnia was all the stuff that FileMaker gives us right out of the box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable this, and I'm going to this is my sanitized result. So what we have here is we create a variable called flights, and we assign it to the response data, and we go into the portal data array, and then we get the flight port. This is the flight information. Then I have a function called sanitize key, and it just is something that cleans out all those keys. I pass it flights. Once I do that, I unset portal data flight. And unsetting in PHP, that just means it gets rid of that object it gets rid of that object in the array. So I do the same thing for activities, activity roles, parties, couriers, and then I do something else. Here I'm not transforming anything or sanitizing anything. I'm actually just getting rid of the portal data info because I don't need it. So once I do this, my result ends up being a new array where I pass it the shipment, but it's got fewer things in it. And then I have kind of a first-class citizen of flights, activities, activity roles, parties, and couriers. So now that I've made this change and I save it, we'll go back to Insomnia. And now you can see I still have some portal data coming back because I just didn't go to the trouble of converting every single thing for the purposes of this demo. But when I collapse the portal data, you'll see that now we have flights, activities, parties, and notice we have no table names. We just have field names. Much easier to parse. It's easier to loop through. It's easier to specify in any kind of template, any kind of language. So you can achieve the same thing with pure JavaScript, and you can do it in PHP, and you can probably do it in any language that you like, Python, Go. So this is something that I usually do when I'm returning a lot of data back to a browser. And I will also say that there are some other techniques to do this. I met a guy at Pause who he solved this problem by generating his own JSON instead of letting FileMaker generate it. He manufactured his own JSON in a script and just returned the script result, which is great, which is smart. And I would investigate that if I had an opportunity to. So let's shift a little bit. We've looked at what a PHP application can look like with this data coming back, using a CSS framework called Bulma. It's using a PHP framework called CodeIgniter. You can do the same thing with Laravel or anything else you choose. And now we are going to look at this in Vue. So I've got a Vue instance running on localhost port 8080. I'm going to log in. Notice that just that subtle little just sort of faded in here. So this is a Vue. This is a single page application. So this is something that you're probably a lot more familiar with modern web applications. So looks similar, right? Not exactly similar because this is using a different framework. It's using, so anything like Vue or React or any of those other things, a lot of times there are CSS frameworks that you can adopt inside them that you can use for generating components. So this one happens to be called Vuetify, and you get a lot of things out of the box, like scaling. So let me just jump to a shipment. You see, this looks a little different, but we achieve the same thing. We've got, this, it took me one line of code to add something where I could filter through all this. I've got pagination, one line of code. Date pickers, one line of code. You just pass it what kind of date picker you want. It's just super simple, super elegant. This is another picker that I can do. So I'm not going to search. I'm just going to jump in to that same shipment. So here we go. Pull up this shipment again so we know what we're looking at, comparing apples to apples. So slightly different. It's not going to be exactly the same. We're using an entirely different framework. We're using an entirely different technology. But the result is something that you can see because I'm pointing it out, but it goes a long way to, let's see, where am I? Yeah. It goes a long way to show that this same exact data is serving a Vue application instead of a PHP application. So I think some of this, yeah. So same deal. Some things look a little different, but the data, it's driven by the exact same data. Let's see, what else do I have? Yeah, so I have crates. That's a different behavior, but that was the behavior out of the box, and it works for me. Let's see if yep, we've got contents here. I don't have every single component. Another thing I want to point out when it comes to web development, as opposed to FileMaker development, is, for example, this flight card here, this box is actually its own component. And what I mean by that is, if we look at, if we look at VS Code and we look at, oh, it's down here. So this, I'm in a file called shipmentdetail.vue, and this is a view that has, it has a lot of stuff in it. But what I want to point out right now is that we import certain information, and one of the things that we import is a flights card. So we import a flights card, and it's in a folder called components. And then up here, we have this box that's a grid, typical grid like you're used to seeing in Bootstrap or any other framework. And then we pass in, we have our flights card, and we pass it some data. We pass it a flight number, we pass it a flights object, and we pass it an airway bill. So what that flights card looks like is something that is, it's not 100 lines of code, it's far less. And all we're looking at is a very simple table. And then we get down here and and then here's a V4 directive. And all we're doing is we're just looping through however many flights got passed to this card. And this is it. So it's a great way to break up your code and your logic into these small chunks, and you just import them, pass the data to them, and go from there. So it's one really nice advantage when you sort of switch hats and do web development. I pass those three objects in here, and then where it says props, these are getting the data and displaying them here. When you see this flight dot departure airport, so let me see if I can pull up something quickly that would have shown. So this is how you have to write that out in order to deal with the double colons. It might look like a small detail, but when you're doing it over and over, and like me, when you teach yourself things and you have to figure out actually how to do this, I mean, there's lots of tutorials on how to set up Vue or React or anything else. There's not a lot of places where you can find out how to handle a string with a double colon in it. But so that's how that's done, and you can see this. It's easier to read, it's easier to parse, it's easier to handle. So we've looked at, if you remember that slide, we looked at FileMaker, we've looked at this PHP with Vue, we've looked at we've looked at Vue with the data API, we've looked at PHP with the data API, and now I'm gonna open one more thing. So this is actually looking at almost the same data, but it's not coming from FileMaker, it's coming from MongoDB. This is FileMaker 20, everyone. No, it's not. This is looking at MongoDB. So what I did was I thought, what would it look like if you used a NoSQL backend for this idea of a shipment and all that entails. And remember, there's one shipment record there, but there are lots of relationships to lots of different records in different tables to generate all this data. All this data represents several records. And notice our time here. I want you to notice that I do this, and I'm sure it caches a little bit, but it'll get faster. So we've got 313 milliseconds, 182. Took over a minute, over a second a moment ago. I'm going to switch over and look at. So this is grabbing that same shipment. You can see it's faster. Now, I don't have any charts or any benchmarks on how much faster, and I don't have a bunch of servers set up like Wimdecourt might do, although I would love to. But needless to say, not only is this super fast, and I don't have all the data here. I just didn't have the time to put all the data into this record. But the beautiful thing is, everything you see here is one record. It's one record with either arrays, nested arrays, or nested objects. And a lot of times in the MongoDB world, you might the term an embedded document might be. So this is one MongoDB document, complete with a shipper address, other shipper information, and we've got the consignee, and then we get down here to contacts. So we have an array of contacts, and get this, every contact has its own unique UUID, and it gets it by default. So I can edit these records by using their own ID, and of course, they have their own primary keys in the other table too, but I had to create those. And one of the nice things about MongoDB is there's always an ID field, and there's an ID field for objects inside arrays inside a document. So it is not FileMaker 20, but it's but I thought it would be interesting to see what it would look like if I could take a shipment that didn't cross 20 records, but had everything was in one record. And this, let's see, this was my exercise and my goal to run through. And I'm actually done. So Eric, Vince,
and it's really, really awesome, Michael. Certainly opens my eyes, to all the stuff that's coming as well, or what's going on in the world in general with web technologies. It's so cool that so cool that you've been working in this PHP for such a long time, and that you've been exploring all these other technologies. And great that you've also presented it in this way to compare them for us. Yeah, so thank you. And yes, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I had a few questions about some of the tools that you were using. You
Yes, sir.
mentioned Sublime Text. Um, what do you like about that one?
Um, well, I found Sublime after TextMate sort of got long in the tooth and wasn't being updated for a long time. It just sort of evolved. I used to use BB Edit, 100 years ago, and I eventually started using something called TextMate. TextMate kind of went away and wasn't being developed, and then Sublime came on the scene, and Sublime was it's super fast. It's got lots and lots of libraries. I know Beeswax has created some sort of plugins for Sublime as well as TextMate,
Hmm.
and I believe if I'm not mistaken, I think it's written in Python. But it's very extensible. It has a gazillion themes. It can parse, any language you can think of, and if you can't find it, someone probably created a plugin for it. And up until a few years ago, it was pretty much the only editor I saw, other than something that was more robust, like NetBeans or something that was more complete. It's pretty lightweight and super, super fast. So Sublime was my editor of choice, but as I started to learn more JavaScript things, tutorials that I watched, and people that I chatted with, they were all using VS Code, and there's a reason. It's a really powerful editor, and like I said earlier, I just I have those two different things so that I concentrate on. I really like VS Code a lot, but I have so many keystrokes and key commands that I know. I have all this muscle memory for TextMate. I mean, I'm sorry, for Sublime Text, and so and I have libraries. I have all the stuff that is in my PHP wheelhouse. So when I do PHP development, I still do it in Sublime. JavaScript development, I do in VS Code.
Okay. And then you mentioned using Insomnia instead of Postman. You mentioned the differences between those.
Yeah, so I'm not an expert at either one, but I used to use Postman exclusively, and someone turned me on to Insomnia, and I'm not an expert at this stuff. And I Postman is when I wanted to do things that were a little more complicated. It was hard to do, and I always had to relearn it. And then when I got someone suggested Insomnia, and Insomnia is just it's a little more accessible. It's a simpler interface. For example, for environments, there you can set up multiple environments, but it's all just JSON. And in Postman, you've got fields that you go in, and there's no way to do it just in a text way like this. Another thing I'll mention about Postman is while it's widely used and much loved, I actually have a fair amount of problems with it, and I keep on getting these socket errors sometimes, and I haven't figured out why, but it turns out a lot of people have that same problem. And even today, I was trying to see if I could use Postman, because in Postman you can have multiple tabs at once, and I thought it would be easier to just switch tabs to present, and Insomnia doesn't have that. But I couldn't get one particular API. I couldn't get it to work, and so I just always go back to Insomnia. It's very, very simple. I would say it's a lot simpler than Postman as well. But I'm not knocking Postman. I just happen to like Insomnia, and really mostly because it's pretty simple.
Hey, Michael, I have a quick question. So you showed the application running in a browser, but any reason why you wouldn't run it in a web viewer within FileMaker, like an embedded web viewer in a window?
Well, the people that use it are not. They're not in the FileMaker solution is behind a firewall,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's for
Oh, I
employees
see.
only. And the browser is something that they can simply. Am I sharing my screen again?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so they can a coordinator can be in a shipment and click this, and copy this and put it in an email or Teams or something and send that to them. And if they have credentials, once they log in, it will route them straight to this. So there's just, I imagine one thing to say is, it's FileMaker, it's licensing and all that. So these people are definitely external users. So does that answer it?
Yeah, that answers my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have not done a ton of stuff in web viewers because I kind of just go straight to a browser. But when I was showing off this, let's see, let me jump back. So if you look at shipments here, and I'm going to just quickly pull up a list of the shipments that I had. So this is using, I showed some filtering before, but this is, even if I had 100 shipments, it would be just as fast. This is using this probably very well known to this audience, data tables, which is something a lot of people use in a web viewer, right? In FileMaker. And of course, it was born before it ever found its way into a web viewer. So there's a lot of things in here that you could do. And I've had some colleagues in the past that have actually, stuck whole applications inside a web viewer. But that's when the audience has FileMaker client.
What do you mean by data tables?
Data tables is it's a popular JavaScript library that just allows you to throw a bunch of data at it, and you can sort and filter and all kinds of stuff. See if I can pull it up real quick. Yeah. So I'm not positive, but I believe a lot of people that use data tables inside a web viewer and FileMaker, they grab FileMaker data and they do this. So you can paginate and sort and filter, and this is exactly what I was doing in that one shipment. So it's a powerful and simple, and it's been around a long time. This JavaScript library.
And it's just directly it's getting its data from FileMaker.
Yes, in my case, it's getting its data from the data API. It's loaded into the browser, and then I'm filtering and sorting by it. But if inside a web viewer, and this is where I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I've done it in the past. I mean, it's been done for, I'll take you all back to Jason Young when he did that SQL Explorer back in the day. He was showing the world how to execute SQL, but the results were in a table that you could sort and filter, and he was using data tables in a web viewer. So it's been around for a while. So I don't know how he was looking at the data. I imagine now, if anyone else that it's on the call might know, but I think now with 19, is there a way to, you can call a script and get the data into the web viewer, and then you would just load it. You just load it and it will populate.
So if I may, I've got excuse me, I have a question. Michael, first off, terrific presentation.
Thank you.
I have an architectural question, tiny bit of setup, just to review what I think I saw. I thought it was particularly interesting what you're doing with the PHP middleware, where you're querying a FileMaker layout that's kind of like fully loaded with more than you want, and then you're using PHP to reduce it down, which I assume you're doing in order to feed into Vue the minimum required amount of JavaScript. So that's what I think, the goal was, eloquently executed. And I thought that was really interesting. And I'm just curious how that compares. That seems like a good architecture. That all said, I'm kind of curious how that would compare to having separate layouts, if possible, to represent subsets of data for different queries?
Yes. Well, I definitely, so in my experience and what I've learned is that you want as few reads as possible. Um, and so for a shipment with all that information, and if you all can see my screen, this is the layout that query is pointing to, this shipment layout. But when I query for a group of shipments on a particular date, I definitely don't use this layout. I use, well, I've got this kind of locked down. Let me just do this. Shipment list. So this is the layout that's used when I query for a list view, because this is the only data I need. And then when I query a single shipment, I point the data API to a different layout. Does that, I'm not sure if that answers
Yeah,
part
no,
of your question.
I think it's spot on. In other words, you're doing a little bit of each. You're doing layouts that are specific to the data that you want returned, and then in other cases, or in the case that you demoed earlier, in the presentation, you've got a layout that for whatever reason has more than you need, and you're in PHP, so it's really really fast,
Yeah,
I reckon, and you're using PHP, which is hyper fast. And I'd imagine that also might, be able, fewer layouts in FileMaker, your speed to completion of the project is increased by shifting some of the architecture into the PHP. So anyway, I thought it was really
yeah.
interesting.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. So, but one thing is that it's not so much, I need all the fields that are on this layout for a shipment, which are a lot. I mean, it bothers me because there's so much data, but of course it's required. What I'm doing is I'm getting rid of all the table names from all the portals on here. So I need, I need all the data. I just don't want, I don't want the metadata, and I want to clean out the table names because it's easier to throw around and parse.
Oh,
Um,
okay, that does make sense. In other words, the layout represents kind of, for the most part, the minimum amount of data that you need. It's just due to the nature of the FileMaker data API comes back with um, cruft that you're
yeah,
cleaning out before you
right.
feed it into the browser.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can see I've got a rest folder, and these are so not all of these are being used. I may have put one in here and then found some better way, but these are the layouts that you know I have. I'd rather have 20 layouts than 10 if I can have a layout. If I need a layout that only, if I need 4 fields, I'm going to have a layout with 4 fields because it's going to be faster and it's not
Right. Okay.
expensive to create another
Yeah.
layout FileMaker.
Yeah. You definitely clarified it. So you've got an optimized architecture in terms of your PHP to FileMaker communication, minimum amount of data over that wire, and then your PHP, you're cleaning out the cruft, so you've got a very clean JSON fed into view. So it's I would say it looks well optimized to me.
Yeah. Well, good. Yeah,
Well,
I think it is.
it looks that way.
Here's another interesting layout in that this layout has the password hash, so it gets queried, but it doesn't get returned. But what this is when someone authenticates, um, this is a portal row of all their roles that they have access to, which there's some logic in PHP and there's some logic in FileMaker that drives that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm doing this. I've got this two-factor authentication going. So when someone logs in for the first time, I look up their record and I see we check to see, we've got IDs and um, what browser they're using and all that stuff. So if they log in from a phone and they've never logged in from a phone before, they're going to get challenged. They're going to say, hey, we just sent you a PIN, and it will send them a PIN. Then they'll get that verification, put a PIN in, and then we store a cookie, and that way we verify browsers. So that's kind of a nice thing. And if there are no other question, if there is not another question right this second, I think it's prudent to, I think it would be cool to show So the login script is something that, so some of this I borrowed from someone's work, and then I made a bunch of changes to it, but it's pretty cool and pretty robust. And this is not something I had done before this project. So the first thing we do is we see if the user exists at all. And we also make sure that they actually have access to do this. There are lots of ways that we stop them before they can ever log in. So we look at their email address. We check if they're found. And if they're not, we log it. We log the information that came in, and we return an error. And this is where I'm actually returning my own. I mentioned to you that when you use scripts, you can return your own JSON. So in this case, this is the information. I'm returning my own JSON. And when FileMaker, the data API, throws back a result, if you put something in the script result, you're going to get that string of JSON back as well. So you get the JSON that FileMaker gives you back, like, you know, the error code and all that. But then you can also give it other information that you can use. So this is the, so if they don't have an account, it'll say account not found at all. And then this is that single pass loop that probably at least some of you are familiar with. I think it's a great, great technique. Then if there are too many found, we also exit. If we get past that, we check the password, and I try to be, we're being pretty, I think we're using some good practices with regard to password encryption. And we check the password, and then let's see if the password doesn't match, of course, they don't get in. Then if they get past that, we check to see if that cookie came back and if they have a token. And if they don't, then we go ahead and we set a PIN, we store this stuff, and then we respond with an email and an ID, and they're not logged in, but we respond with a PIN. And then in the PHP app, we see that this person successfully logged in, but this device is not authenticated. So PHP uses Mailjet, but any name your third-party transactional email service, and it sends an email out, and that's what the person gets. If we pass that, I think there's another instance where we do the same thing. And then we still finally, at the very end, if they get through all these checks, return logged in true. So they're logged in, they're authenticated. And then down here, we exit the script with a result, and we also log everything. So that is my small way of saying you can be very powerful running a script in the data API.
Thank you.
Cool.
Most of the stuff that you had, Michael, was like a read only. Do you have anything on there that would be a data manipulation?
Yes, there's one thing, and I'll actually show it off. So if an employee of the company logs in, and I'm going to call them a field ops, when they log in, we know that they're an employee because they're going to have a certain role. And if they have that role, I'm going to jump into the shipment. They can see these activities are completed, but it might be that they're not. So they can go in here and they can add a note, and we can mark it complete or not, and I'm going to save it. And that's the thing that they can do. So if I go back to the shipment, oh gosh, was it palletized? Nope. Was it? Nope. What note did I go into? Note here, events. That's the thing that they can do. And notice I even have, they wanted so much granular control over this, they asked that we set a flag per activity. So there's this allow client edit.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is on a client, let's say the agent in Paris that's receiving the artwork, they might want to go in and say, hey, the plane landed, or it's gone through customs, and so they'll have a specific activity and they'll allow a client to edit it, and they can go in and edit that record. Otherwise, they won't be able to edit it in the web application, and if they're not an employee, they wouldn't be able to edit it anyway. Originally, we had it to where they could create activities, but they actually didn't trust field ops enough, and they wanted to put the burden back on the coordinators in the office to say, look, if there's an activity, we're going to know what that activity is before the shipment ever takes place. So it used to be that people could create activity records, and now they actually can't anyway. All they can do is edit them, and that's a note. They can upload a file, which actually has nothing to do with FileMaker whatsoever, and they can check it, they can flag it as complete. And if I flag it as complete, whoops. So yeah, that's me. I broke something because I was doing some demo. But so I flagged it as complete, and I'm sure I turned something off. But if it's complete and you save it, an email transaction goes out. And I'm sure I disabled something back in the controller, and that's why we just saw that error. But it's sort of nice also, if someone's editing an activity, they can see all the people that are going to receive notifications once that happens. And all that notification stuff, it's also something that happens completely outside of FileMaker. All that happens within PHP, just immediately sends out the notifications, but we log that those notifications went out to those people.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions?
Well, I had one other question about the, you mentioned earlier on, there was a conversation you had about the security of, hitting the database directly or something like that.
Yeah. Yes.
How did that go? I mean, what were the concerns, and do you believe they were legitimate concerns?
Well, I bet someone on this call can speak to this more than I can, but I can explain what happened was when we were testing this, and I didn't show this off very much, but see this. So this Alex field ops shipment. If I mouse over that, you probably can't see it, but this is pointing to AWS. Before we were just showing, the contents, or the field names, the container data and the link. We were doing that whole streaming thing. It just, when you get a FileMaker record, it comes back, this value is coming back, and when they covered on it or clicked on it, and when they opened this, so I'm going to go ahead and click on this. So this is the PDF, right? And see, it says artwise-bucket.s3.amazon, blah, blah, blah. Well, when they did this, they saw their internal, their information for their server. And that scared them. Does that make sense? They said, people can see the URL for the server, because when you stream a container data from FileMaker, and someone else please jump in, but when you stream a container data from FileMaker, it's that URL that goes straight to the database, and it says, the name of the server / streaming something or other, and then there's a long encrypted code there. But the point is that it was showing that URL, and even though it was secure, it's it's in air quotes secure, they couldn't get to anything anyway because of the rest of the security model that scared them. And does anyone else want to speak to maybe better than I just did about why that would be, or whether or not this is a good idea, or that it shouldn't have mattered. It doesn't matter if you see the URL when you're streaming a PDF from a container.
Well, something has to serve up that data, so it would be obviously it would be the FileMaker server, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they just were a lot more comfortable pushing that up. So
Doesn't S3 also have some additional security benefits where, like, even if you copy that URL, after at some point it expires or
yeah,
something?
you can set expiration dates. You can set all kinds of security on it. Yes, that's
Mhm.
correct. I mean,
Can you
I
tell,
think it's a. Go ahead.
can you tell me more? What is S3?
S3 stands for Simple Storage Service, if I'm not mistaken, and it is AWS's one of their more popular services. It's cloud storage. That put simply, it's you can store anything you want in there. Some people actually store static HTML and serve websites. People can put view applications once they're compiled, and they'll stick it in S3 and then serve it. But it's storage. I know that when Auto does, the Geist's tool, when it does, it can do backups to S3. When I serve uh, files around, I often use S3, and this is it's probably not an example that um, you know your next door neighbor would know about, but as software developers and doing what we're doing and looking at this demo, S3 is great for something like this, because one of the problems that I've seen a lot of people get into is they store all these giant files in containers, and if you're not using external storage, your database gets super big, and there's all kinds of problems with that. And when you're using S3, it's the other thing to say about it, in case someone else doesn't, is it's extremely inexpensive. It's super, super, super cheap, and you get all this robust AWS services wrapped around it.
Yeah, just to riff off that, Mike, you've been generous with your shout outs to different people. So I'm going to add that I think it's, if I remember this right, Jason Wood and Michael Duncan did presentations about integrating FileMaker with S3 that covered some, they were full on about that, and they covered some of the features that are wrapped around it and some of the benefits. To Vince's point, some additional security that you get from it. And S3 does have, it's got a whole backend infrastructure they've got, I think last I checked, 3 levels of storage, and they move things around for you. And I've worked a lot in New York City with container, a lot of digital assets in this town. And I thought it was very, very interesting, the possibility of migrating from, old school container fields to S3 storage. A lot of possibilities there.
Yep. I'm actually about to help out on a project in the next few weeks, and that's exactly what we're doing. Is they want um, and they want their clients to be able to access files, and they want their clients to be able to upload files, and they don't want their clients to have access to their FileMaker database. So they're going to migrate all their storage to S3. So I think it's good. And so S3 is so popular and so ubiquitous that there are lots of other cloud providers that provide storage, but they all use, or not all of them, many of them use S3 compatible APIs. So if you're familiar with S3 and you want to use DigitalOcean or Wasabi, you don't have to learn a new API, or new formatting, or new anything. It's all you do is you just change some keys around. That's how popular S3 is that other companies use their services. There's David Nydal, who's from Blue Feather in Atlanta. I think he has a product called something Cloud Container something, and he allows you to. It's a FileMaker solution, and it uses S3, but it also uses anything compatible with S3 to manage digital assets.
Mike, I do have a question. You reminded me of about on the container thing earlier. You had this thing where you said you download the objects, and then you had the little button that you clicked, which downloaded a. It was either a thumbnail or the full image. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I think it was is the full image, but it just put a thumbnail in the container. So it's and I'll do that again.
So in other words, initially you're just loading I guess the pointers to the S3 files, and then on demand, when you click as needed, you're downloading perhaps the entire digital image in order to use get thumbnail to render a thumbnail to fit the space kind of
Yes,
thing.
sir. That's exactly right. Yeah. They didn't they might want to know that, hey, okay, they took a picture of the crate on getting onto the, being loaded onto the aircraft, or they took a picture of the crate going through customs. And so people, they might want to know that someone took pictures of something, and if they give it a description, then they can look through here, and as I'm showing on my screen, if this, this 404 Twitter was obviously some random thing that I pushed up there. But if that was the image that they knew they wanted, they would only have to download that one, and then they could then they could also just what just happened? Oh, that's weird.
So
Can you
yeah,
see
I mean
that?
demo image, and Mike, the get thumbnail feature in FileMaker that makes the thumbnails is great. We've got 2 digital asset projects currently, and one of the issues that we've faced is splitting PDFs on Mac and Windows, which is a bit of a challenge. And then I wonder how much functionality AWS has in their backend infrastructure to render the thumbnail on their side, so that you perhaps, if you need a thumbnail, you could just download a thumbnail as opposed to downloading the full image and then creating the thumbnail FileMaker.
Yeah, I think that I have heard people solve that problem by using a Lambda function to generate a thumbnail from an object.
Yeah.
And then get the thumbnail instead of the 10 meg file.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting possibilities.
Any other questions? If there's no other questions, I think we can wrap. What do you say,
All right.
Michael?
Or any
Yeah,
further discussion for the next 10 minutes? But yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was great.
My pleasure. Thank you all for your time. I enjoyed doing it.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, very,
Thank you.
very eye-opening in a sense. Yeah, very cool.
Well, if anyone has any follow-up questions, or you want to know about something I touched on but I didn't really go into, like a CSS framework, or how did you achieve that, by all means, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to. I'm in that FM slug, and I'm happy to chat or talk or share a file or do anything like that if you'd like. And I'm at michael@9degrees.com, number 9 degrees.
Thanks, Michael. Very cool. I agree with everyone. Excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.